A Soviet combat aircraft had one job: keep sorties flowing as the front changed. We start in 1939, and we don't stop until 1945. This isn't every sub-variant or workshop tweak. This is every major family that flew in numbers and shaped doctrine. Each one solved a problem until a harsher problem arrived. First, the Polikarpov I-16, built for short-range defense near fragile airfields. Simple to support, but boxed in by fast-changing requirements. Up next, the Tupolev SB, a bomber built around speed and early war assumptions. It stayed relevant, but only while the sky stayed forgiving. Next, the DB-3 and Il-4 line, built for reach when geography became the enemy. Effective in concept, but stretched by endurance, maintenance, and navigation limits. Now the stopgaps fade, and the mass wartime families take over. That's where the story starts moving faster, and the pace never slows again. Yak I opens the fighter story with frontline balance. LA-5 follows, hardening the other. Fighter line as conditions tighten. Il-2 arrives for the ground war's daily demands and repeatable support. PE-2 takes the middle distance, fast enough to stay relevant. Tu-2 shows refinement once production and training stabilize. PE-8 sits above it all, a heavy layer that appears in limited numbers. Li-2 keeps fuel, crews, and parts moving when roads fail. P-39 Airacobra proves a foreign design can fit Soviet needs. Each name marks a gap the next machine was built for. Now we rewind to the breaking point. Because 1941 rewrote the rules almost overnight. First come the holdovers that kept units operational. This solved availability until speed, protection, and pilot workload became the daily limit. Polikarpov I-15 and I-153 arrive as biplane stopgaps. They were built for short field defense and simple handling. They made sense on rough strips and rushed schedules, but they had little room to grow once the sky modernized. Next, the Polikarpov I-16. It was a compact interceptor. It meant to defend close to the front. It showed up everywhere early because it was already there. It existed to cover gaps when newer fighters were scarce. Combat accounts often describe sharp agility, but the design hit a ceiling fast. Up next, the MiG-3. It was shaped around interception where altitude could matter most. When missions matched that intent, it fit the problem. When fighting compressed lower, the same strengths mattered less. Moving on, the Tupolev SB family. It carried pre-war bomber assumptions into a harsher air war. It was built around speed-forward strike in earlier conditions. It worked in the opening months, but attrition punished crews and airframes quickly. As defenses and interception intensified, survivability demands outgrew the airframe. These aircraft bought time while the rules collapsed. Next, Soviet aviation turns toward families built to scale and endure. Next come fighters built to be produced, repaired, and rotated endlessly. This solved air defense, until the front demanded better low-altitude control and faster replacement cycles. Yak I starts the backbone, then Yak 7 and Yak 9 expand it. They were designed for balanced performance that factories could repeat. They existed to give regiments a predictable tool. They fit dispersed airfields and non-stop sortie tempo. The family stayed flexible, but variants traded range, weight, and handling. Public reporting indicates the real advantage was continuity. Training stayed consistent across regiments. Next, Yak 3. It appears when the system is more mature. It compresses the idea into a sharper frontline package. It pushes effectiveness inside proven constraints. Often described as optimized for typical frontline conditions, it arrived late. That timing keeps it from defining the whole war. Up next, the Lavochkin path. It begins with LaGG-3, built to fill the same fighter gap. It carried early war compromises and material constraints in many accounts. It could keep units flying, but demanded patience. Then LA-5 arrives as the line hardens under pressure. It reflects a shift toward what the front actually demanded. Iteration beats reinvention. Finally, LA-7 tightens the same line again. It represents refinement once lessons stopped changing weekly. 2 tracks, 1 outcome. Standardized fighters that could be replaced fast. And once the air layer stabilizes, the ground war demands a purpose-built answer. Early war roles blur because survival outruns doctrine. A fighter drops bombs when nothing else can. That worked, but only while targets stayed close. It worked, but only while defenses stayed uneven. Then the front hardens and stretches. The air war stops rewarding improvisation and starts rewarding specialization. Fighters hold the air layer above the line. They exist to keep the system breathing. Strike aircraft shape the ground layer on the line. They exist to deliver repeatable effects under pressure. Bombers extend pressure beyond the line. They exist to reach what the frontline aircraft cannot. This division solved coordination and sortie rhythm, but it created a new requirement immediately. Survivability becomes a design demand, not a hope. Payload becomes secondary to returning tomorrow. So the war stops asking for fighters with bombs. It starts asking for aircraft built around protection and continuity. Moving on, the attacker family that embodied that shift. Moving on to aircraft designed around punishment and continuity. Fighters held the air until the ground war demanded machines that could return again and again. First, the Il-2 Shturmovik. It existed to strike under fire and still come back. Protection came first because the front moved daily and losses were not theoretical. It fit close, shifting lines where targets appeared and vanished fast. Combat accounts suggest its philosophy favored repeat sorties over elegance. The trade-off was clear: armor and payload shape performance limits. Next, the Il-10. It arrives as lessons harden into refinement. It carries the same purpose, but with a more mature approach to the same problem. Often described as a cleaner execution of the attacker idea, it signals stabilization. But it comes late, and timing limits how widely it defines the war. Up next, the Sukhoi Su-2. This is the lighter bridge before specialization fully locks in. It was designed for flexible strike and reconnaissance support near the front. Useful when roles still overlapped and needs shifted weekly. It could cover multiple tasks without demanding a separate fleet. But as dedicated families expanded, this kind of compromise aircraft got crowded out. Armored attack becomes the constant, and refinement follows. Next, once the line is shaped, the middle distance becomes the problem. Next come the twin-engine aircraft that carried speed and payload into operational depth. Armored attack shaped the line until rail nodes, bridges, and rear areas became the limiting factor. First, the Polikarpov I-15. It was built for time-sensitive strike with a fast twin-engine layout. It fit a huge front where distance punishes slow response. Public reporting often describes strong speed for its class. The trade-off was complexity in the cockpit and on the ground. Crews needed coordination to get consistent results. Next, the Tupolev Tu-2. It appears when production and training stabilize. It exists to refine the same strike layer with more mature design choices. Often described as a strong balance in its category, it reflects a system that learned. But it arrives late, and timing limits whole war dominance. Moving on, because tactical reach isn't strategic reach. Now the DB3 and Il-4 family. This line exists for reach when geography forces depth. It matters when fronts widen and the map itself becomes pressure. Its design intent aligns with endurance and distance. The trade-off is persistent strain. Long sorties amplify maintenance burden and navigation demands. It can extend pressure, but it cannot make distance disappear. These twins fill the operational middle and stretch beyond it. Next, when even this is not enough, rare, heavy, and support layers start to show. Finally, the aircraft that made the frontline layers sustainable. Fast twins and attackers carried tempo until endurance, maritime coverage, and logistics became the constraint. Polikarpov P-8 comes in as the heavy layer. It existed to add heavier reach when medium bombers topped out. Public histories treat it as a symbol, not a mass solution. It offered scale beyond tactical concepts, but complexity limited routine output. Next, Beriev MBR-2, a flying boat built to keep eyes on coastal waters where runways were scarce. It mattered where distance and weather erased certainty. Persistence was its value, but exposure grew whenever opposition improved. Up next, Lisunov Li-2, not glamorous but decisive for continuity. It moved crews, parts, and evacuation capacity when roads and rail could not keep up. Practical, across the system, yet dependent on usable airfields. Next, the P-39 Airacobra under Lend-Lease, a foreign fighter that filled gaps fast and integrated into Soviet routines. Public reporting indicates strong adoption where profiles fit. The trade-off was the import burden, training, spares, and unfamiliar standards. Legacy, in one line, Soviet WWII aviation was built around repeatable sortie families, not myths, designed to be maintained under daily pressure. If a subvariant is missing, that is scope grouping, not oversight. Next time, we track the shifts year by year as the front rewrites the air war again.